Now, fretboard radius can be a bit of a divisive topic in the guitar world, so me and Lee thought we'd have a sit down and a chat about the pros and cons, the difference between vintage and modern style radius, and just let you know our kind of preferences and our opinions on the radius world. So it's a bit of a long one, so strap yourself in and let's get started. Hi, Conan at Project Music here, and today I'm actually joined by Lee, who is one of the owners of Project Music, and we are going to talk about fretboard radius and kind of everything that it entails when it comes to guitars. So Lee, what are your initial opinions on fretboard radius?
Well, it's something we get asked about a lot. There's a wide variety of opinions on fretboard radiuses, and it's a very personal choice. It also depends a lot on your background and your experience. Personally, these days I prefer would be termed as a vintage radius or 7 1/4 radius fingerboard, which would be something that is 50s inspired guitar would typically have, and this is a Fender Vintera and it has a 7 1/4 vintage radius fingerboard. I prefer that for my own style of playing, my own hands and my own experience. If you'd asked me 5 or 6 years ago what my favourite radius would be, it would be completely different. I actually preferred a much flatter radius, maybe 10 or even 12 radius fingerboard. I don't know why it's changed. It just has changed over the last few years. Maybe it's I'm getting older, I don't know. Maybe it's just because my style is changing slightly, and also it's what I've been playing. So I think that when customers ask us about a fingerboard radius, they're always got a starting point. If they have played a lot of classical guitar, they'll be used to quite a flat fingerboard, because typically classical guitars are flat, or if they've been playing a very contemporary instrument, like something like Conan's got there, which is a Suhr with a compound radius fingerboard, or maybe a mayonnaise or a custom build, fairly modern slick neck, maybe 12, even 16 compound radius fingerboard. If you're used to that, then playing something like this, which is a 7 1/4 radius, might feel very clunky or very very difficult to work with. So it does depend on your starting point. If you've learnt on a guitar that has a very modern radius, then you pick up something that's a 50s or vintage influenced guitar. It'll just feel odd. It isn't odd. It's just that you're not used to it. And this is one of the things that we get a lot, is that a customer, and it might not even be just the radius, it might be the neck profile as well, if you package the two together, or even fret choice. Although we're talking about radius in this instance, it is the whole thing. And if you're coming into a music shop, or you're looking online at specifications for guitars to buy, or work out what you like and what you don't like, you've got to factor in what you're used to. And the very fact that I used to prefer a flatter radius fingerboard, and now I prefer a vintage radius, I would put down to the fact that, that's what I've been playing, and I've got used to it, and now I prefer it. So it is very much, the question needs to be answered individually for what are you used to, and kind of go from there. How do you find it? How do you assess it?
I completely agree. I think the first guitar that I started on was a Gibson. Was an Epiphone Les Paul, and that's got a 12-inch board. So for a long time, that's all I could really play was something flatter, so like 10s, 12s, that sort of thing. I just always felt way more comfortable on that. Whereas now I'm much more guitar specific, I think. If I know that it's a guitar that I'm going to be playing, maybe sort of more jazzy, more bluesy stuff on it, somehow my brain switches into a position of I don't mind it being a little bit more vintage, sort of 7s, 9.5, all that sort of area. I'm happy with that. But I know that in my band and things like that, when I want to play big riffs and terribly played leads, I somehow need, it's like a mental thing, that I just need a flatter board. So something like a 12 or a compound, I really, really like compound boards. So things like Suhrs and that sort of thing really work for me. So I think overall, I'm probably a flat radius kind of person because of what I started with. I think if I'd started on a very super vintage spec Strat or something like that, I probably would have stuck with more your 7.25, 7.5s and that sort of thing. And it's just always been something that I've arguably focused on too much on its own. And I think, like you just said, over the last few years, it's kind of changed for me in the fact of, I think you have to get the whole package for a neck.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm like, oh, this neck feels amazing, but the fretboard radius is too flat or too, either way, whichever way. Sometimes the neck is too small, but the fretboard radius is perfect, or the fret size is perfect. Trying to get the synergy of all three as the holy trifecta of the necks, I suppose, is very hard sometimes. But that is all part of the kind of discovery of what works best for you. However, you can also get very, very hung up on one of those specs. It's very easy to go, I will only ever play a 9.5 board. And that's fine, that's not a problem. But sometimes you find the perfect guitar in every other way, and it happens to be maybe a 10-inch or a 12-inch board. Just try it and try and go for it. And like Lee says, you get used to these things. A lot of them, there's very, very small differences. I understand if you're used to an Ibanez Wizard neck and then you get, a 52U neck profile, that's a big change. I kind of understand that side of things. But if it's small changes, little adjustments here and there, taking the time to get used to it, just like Lee's got, I guess you've got used to over the last few years. You've kind of gone into that more vintage range, because that's obviously the rest of the guitar you absolutely loved, and you just lost yourself in it, and then you got used to the radius and you're happy now. So
I think that what's important to remember with all specifications is that particularly when we've got people coming into our store here or any shop up and down the country, is that your starting point, what you're used to, is what feels comfortable to you. But if you give yourself a month or two on a different style of instrument, a different neck, a different radius, different geometry of the whole build, that will then just become normal for you, and you just get used to it. What's interesting, and what I find I constantly keep going back to, is that I've been selling guitars for a long while, and when I started selling them, which is in the early 80s, I remember people just came in and bought a guitar, and they'd ask for a Strat, and just say, which one would you like? And they'd say,
what colour would you like, sir?
Yeah, it would literally be, I'll have a black one, please. Since the advent of all the information that's out there online and all the resources that there is a tendency for us all to get a little bit too hung up on some of the very minor differences that these things can actually, you've heard Conan and I talk about what we prefer. Hey, I'll work with anything that feels right. I'm really happy with anything.
Agreed.
And I get used to it. And what's interesting to me is in the 80s and 70s and going back before, people didn't even know that there was such a thing as a difference in nut size, radiuses. Yeah, they might have known, but it wasn't really advertised. It wasn't part of the specifications. People would just go into a shop, pick one up and say, I'll have that one, please. It's like acoustic guitars with the nut sizes now. There's been a big shift from it being 1/11/16 to 1 3/4 nut size. And I don't want to digress too much, but it's exactly that thing where people think that they must have 1 3/4 nut size because that's the way it's all gone. Well, the fashion will probably rotate full circle, and probably in 10 years' time, everybody will be wanting 1 11/16 again. So all of these things we're talking about, they are real differences to the guitars, but they are partly in our minds. It's partly what we've read we need, and partly what our own experiences tells us we need. From a practical point of view, a vintage radius neck can suit some styles of playing better. I find, for me, if you're doing more finger picking or chord work, up and down a fingerboard, I find it more comfortable. I haven't got very large hands, and for me it just fits my hands more. It's a flatter radius neck, I actually have to work at a bit harder, whereas if you read a lot of comments or look at what a lot of people are saying, a lot of people will say that the flatter radius fingerboards are a lot slicker, a lot easier to play. I know you remarked that that's what you prefer. But for me, I prefer these days that 7 1/4 vintage radius. As I said, I'd be happy with anything, but it certainly works for my hands more. And you've got a very wide range of guitars that you personally own.
Yeah.
You must have everything from vintage right up to a very modern neck.
It's something that, obviously, like I said, for a long time I wasn't really that worried about. But in the last few years I started thinking about it, and then the last couple of years I've kind of had to go back the other way and kind of not think too hard about it, because I just love guitars. And I think if I pick up a guitar that, even sometimes I've picked up guitars and gone, I don't love the way it looks as such.
Yeah.
But maybe it's quite good.
Yeah.
Obviously working here, you get all kinds of stuff put in front of you, and you pick it up, and all of a sudden within 5 minutes you're writing your riffs on it, and you're going, oh, this feels great, and there's a synergy there. And it could be that I then afterwards look at the spec and go, oh no, it's not right for me.
Yeah.
But in the moment, it was the perfect guitar, because it just worked. Maybe it was just might have been just that build, possibly.
So that's something that we've all experienced, which is, oh, hang on, I don't like that, but I do like it.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. It's a weird mental thing that I think.
And I think it's with guitars, because they're such interesting objects. We all research them. What is the neck? What tuners has it got on it? Everything about them, particularly when you're looking to make a purchase, and you can overanalyze all these things. So I guess this is an indication that both myself and Conan here have started with a preference and maybe changed it around, and it's very movable.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know how you find this, but I find the neck. Actual depth and size and profile, it's actually, I'm not as bothered about that at all as I used to be. If you go back, once again, just 4 or 5 years ago, I found myself quite sensitive to certain styles and diameters of neck. I prefer a slightly more slender neck myself, but I can actually work with anything really well. Whereas if you asked me 5 years ago or so, I would have said, oh no, it has to be, a certain size, a certain profile. But it's what you get used to.
Absolutely. And I think it's also, we take a lot of influence from the people around us, and sometimes I'm like, oh, well, I've got small hands, so a small neck is going to be the right thing, or vice versa. Like, I've got quite big hands, so I think in my back of my mind, oh, well, it's got to be a slightly bigger neck. But for me, I think like we've already mentioned, there's an all-around feel. Also, you get differences with necks with you've got rolled fingerboard edges or not, and that can actually change the feel quite a lot for people. And in fact I had a conversation very recently with someone exactly about rolled fingerboard edges. He has 2 guitars, one has it and one hasn't, but the rest of the guitars are almost identical, and he always goes to the one that has the rolled fingerboard edges, because somehow that neck, because I think if you remember right, the neck profile was exactly the same. I think the fretboard radius is exactly the same. I think the frets were very close anyway, but it was just that one little difference that he always went to.
Yeah.
Whereas for me, I've got guitars with my Strat's got rolled fingerboard edges, but a lot of my other guitars don't. I just play the guitar that I feel like playing that day, and sometimes that's because it's the one that's there. But sometimes focusing too much on these little things mean you just end up discarding something that could be a wonderful instrument as well. I think that's a big thing we find, isn't it? People come in and go, they have an idea and go, oh, I really like this guitar. And then as soon as you tell them that it has a specific spec about its neck, normally it's the neck, I think, because it's a big feel thing. Oh yeah, it's got the 1 3/4 nut, and they go, oh no, I don't like 1 3/4 nuts. Yeah. But the rest of the guitar's the perfect thing for them. Yeah. And I think that's
and what they mean is they're not used to
they're
one.
Not used to it, exactly. Oh, my other guitar's got a 1 1/16. It's like, that's great. It's like, and I've got very small hands, so I can only play small necks. It's like, that's not really the case.
Try playing a mandolin.
That's it, it's like, a prime example of we got a couple of customers who, they are big guys and they play mandolins and they play them very, very well, and they've got hands bigger than mine, and they just go for it and they have no problems, because they've just gone, do you know what, I'm going to work with what I have here. And there's nothing wrong with having preferences, but never let them just completely let you discard a great instrument. Maybe because you want a vintage tone, but you're struggling to find something that's vintage tone, maybe with a modern fretboard radius. Just try the vintage radius. It might just work for you, because you're getting that sound and because you're playing that style of music, even if it's not your normal bag. Maybe I think that's a big part of it. Is experimenting.
I think there's a tendency with every aspect of a guitar specifications to, once you get that guitar in your hands, if it doesn't feel instantly right for you, your inclination is to to put it back down and say, look, that's not for me. But you're missing out on the fact that different instruments with different feels and specifications, different radius necks, different diameter or depth of necks and profiles make you play differently. They draw different things out of you. Absolutely. I've got a number of privately owned guitars that I play all the time, and sometimes I'm in a mood for one particular guitar, a Martin, or I've got a lovely Brook that I play, and they pull different things out of you. That's the beauty of them. Otherwise, we'd only have one guitar. So to say that you must have a certain radius, or you only like certain radiuses, that might be the case, but it's more likely that that's what you're used to, and it closes the door on different styles and different feels that you would otherwise be able to enjoy and actually would benefit your playing, because it opens the door to different styles and maybe if you've only played on flatter radius fingerboards, you pick up a vintage radius guitar. It feels quite clunky and not very intuitive, but after a couple of weeks, I guarantee you're playing differently. Mm-hmm. Your playing will be different because you've worked with the guitar, and you and the guitar have got to know each other a bit better, and you know how to work with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's a very complex subject. There isn't a right or wrong radius. There isn't a right or wrong nut size. There's a fashionable one, and there maybe is a radius that would be regarded as suiting certain styles, or a neck size that would be suiting certain traditional builds. But there isn't a right or wrong, and it's you close the door to a lot of instruments, but also playing styles, if you like, by not exploring and giving other things a go. Really,
I think there's also a level of inspiration you get sometimes from a guitar that is maybe fights you back a little bit and gives you a little bit of a different way. Because for me, a vintage radius is that thing, I guess, because I'm just not used to them. Every time I pick one up, if I don't realise it has one, I'll maybe try and do a bend. It'll choke out a little bit because I'm just not used to it. But if I was to take that guitar home and I was to spend some time with it, I would probably overcome that quite quickly, because it's like anything in guitar playing. I'm constantly hitting problems because we're always learning, we're always trying to build ourselves forward, and part of that is to learn to play other guitars and things. If you go to your mate's house and he happens to have a super vintage spec Strat and all you've ever played is Suhrs and things like that, you're going to struggle straight away, and that's fine, but you can still play the guitar and you can still enjoy yourself playing it, and maybe rather than bending the strings, you're going to do some slides and things like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just something a little bit different. There's an inspiration that you go, maybe I'll just slide that instead. It's just, let's see what happens and experiment. I think that's a great thing. We sometimes get I've got friends who have guitars that they haven't played for a long time, and they're they don't play the best. I might be around the house and I'll have a noodle, and it's maybe a bit off and it's not that brilliant to play, but it's still fun. I'm still playing the guitar, and I'm just having to change little things, adjust it, and learn a little bit more about what guitars do and what they can do for you, even if it's not your, maybe, because obviously this is a bit of a Rolls Royce of a guitar. It's very, very easy to play overall, and it does, it can fight back a little bit, but it doesn't in its general aura. It's just quite an easy to play guitar.
And it's always the case that different instruments draw different things out of your playing at any level and any style of guitar. You find yourself being led slightly by the guitar. So I think what we're saying is that fingerboard radiuses, be aware of what a vintage radius is. Go into a store, try a 7¼ vintage radius fingerboard and see what you think of it. Go into a store and try a modern flat or compound radius a fingerboard and do a comparison, and you will automatically prefer one over the other. But you spend enough time with either of them, and you will find they do great things for you, but differently. So don't write anything off. After all, that in the early years they were using vintage radius fingerboards predominantly, and they did pretty good. So and they're very sought after. So don't write them off. If you've got a concern about them, just spend a little bit of time with them, and you'll come to like them and appreciate them. You might not prefer them, but you'll appreciate them for what they do for you, or what that does for you and your playing.
Absolutely. So let us know what you think about fretboard radius and just generally neck specs and things like that. Pop them in the comments below, and we'll probably have some more conversations about various specs on guitars in the future, and we will see you soon. Well, if you made it to the end, thank you very much for watching. I know it's quite a long conversation, but we hope you picked up some great tips on how to figure out which fretboard radius might work the best for you and your style of playing. We'll be doing quite a few more of these videos in the future, so please hit the subscribe button and the bell notification, and we will see you in the next video.